From an intentional push on a referee to Thiago Silva's standoff with a SWAT team, these are the fighters that are banned from UFC events. The UFC octagon is as close to we'll get to the days of the gladiators, and fans sure cherish the gruesome knockouts and blood-soaked moments. But did you know that several fighters have been indefinitely suspended for their actions inside the ring? Back in 2014, Jason High was one of the hottest rising stars in the UFC. After defeating James Head and Anthony Lapsley, he scored himself a primetime matchup on UFC Fight Night 42. High faced an upper echelon contender in Rafael dos Anjos. Just a few minutes into the second round, dos Anjos knocked out High, laying him out with a nasty left hook. But the drama was only getting started. Just seconds after his defeat, High protested referee Kevin Mahal's decision to call the fight. In a fit of rage, High laid his hands on the ref, pushing him back with intensity. Although it didn't escalate further, High broke one of the golden rules of fighting: never lay a finger on the flippin' ref. UFC President Dana White shared his take on High's idiotic mistake. White said, "You don't ever f***ing touch a referee ever. You're done here." Jason High was immediately dropped from the UFC roster and released from his contract. Despite issuing an apology to Mahal and the rest of the league, Dana White refused to be swayed by High's crocodile tears. The UFC president said he's been apologizing on Twitter, but he's done. That's it. No mercy was given for the up-and-coming fighter who has yet to return to the UFC since the incident. Another fighter who received a lifetime ban is British kickboxer Paul Daly. The London-born bad boy earned quite the reputation in his short stint with the UFC. After signing a 4-match contract in the big leagues, he looked more than capable of contending with the best of the best. Daly's multiple TKO wins ushered him to a huge headline fight. UFC 113 matched Daly against Josh Koscheck, with the winner set to challenge for the welterweight championship. It was the biggest night of Daly's career. Win the fight and earn a shot at taking down the legendary Georges St-Pierre. But on Daly's big night, not only did he lose the fight, but he received a lifelong suspension from the UFC. After the third and final round, tensions were high as the fighters awaited a decision. The judges unanimously declared Koscheck the victor, and instead of commending his opponent, Daly snuck up on Koscheck and swung at him. Thankfully, the cheap shot left hook didn't connect, and the match referee managed to subdue the disgruntled Daly. Once again, Dana White doled out another lifetime ban. He responded to the post-fight incident saying, "There's no excuse for that. You don't ever hit a guy blatantly after the bell like that. I don't care if he becomes the best. He will never fight in the UFC ever again." What a stupid decision by Daly, who was on the cusp of becoming a title contender. There's truly no room for unsportsmanlike behavior in the ring, especially when you consider that these guys are already trying to rip each other's heads off. But let's take a look at the laundry list of fighters who were banned for life for violating the UFC's drug policy. First up, Nick Diaz had a long history with the Nevada State Athletic Commission. Diaz was a fan favorite in the early stages of the UFC. He quickly became a welterweight contender, but his trouble passing drug tests cut his career short. Diaz was originally suspended for an entire year and fined 30% of his fight profits for testing positive to a banned substance. And we aren't talking about steroids. We're talking about the devil's lettuce, marijuana. Diaz had been caught with THC in his system on many occasions and even skipped a few mandatory drug tests. By 2015, Diaz piled up several failed or missed tests, leaving Dana White with no choice but to issue him a 5-year ban. After more than 6 years away from the octagon, Diaz returned in 2021 in a rematch against Robbie Lawler. Lawler knocked out the UFC's favorite pothead, and we have yet to hear from Diaz ever since. But Diaz isn't alone when it comes to fighters who have received bans for repeated drug issues. In fact, heavyweight fighter Ruslan Magomedov became the first UFC fighter to receive a lifetime ban from the USADA. The Russian heavyweight sported an outstanding 14-1 record, yet couldn't manage to stay away from the juice. In 2018, Magomedov failed 2 drug tests where the USADA discovered a plethora of anabolic steroids in his system. His urine sample was practically made up of more steroids than it was piss. Despite last appearing in the UFC back in 2015, the Russian fighter didn't look like he'd be back in the ring anytime soon. Just a year later, Magomedov refused to take a mandatory drug test. Something seemed fishy, and the USADA was not keen on giving the Russian the benefit of the doubt. bout. Magomedov was slapped with a lifetime ban thanks to the 4 times he was caught juicing. His victories inside the octagon will permanently have an asterisk placed next to them. Yet another fighter who fell into the temptation of banned substances is former bantamweight champion TJ Dillashaw. After becoming a UFC champion twice, the 115-pound fighter was caught with EPO in his system. EPO is the same unauthorized substance used by cycling icon Lance Armstrong, which stimulates red blood cell production in the bone marrow. In 2019, the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency suspended Dillashaw for 2 years. A few days later, Dillashaw broke his silence and owned up to his mistake. Unfortunately, he was forced to relinquish his bantamweight title belt and forfeit his earnings from the Henry Cejudo fight. Moving on, let's dive into the fighters whose issues outside of the ring led to bans in the UFC. BJ Penn became one of the most savage fighters of all time after his 2008 lightweight championship fight against Joe Stevenson. Penn cut up Stevenson with a deadly elbow early into the fight and proceeded to choke out his opponent to attain the title belt. In one of the most grotesque and barbaric moments in UFC history, Penn celebrated his title by licking Stevenson's blood off of his gloves. You heard that right. BJ Penn rightfully earned a reputation as a killer fighter, but he didn't quite know when to turn off his killer instinct. Penn was involved in a series of street fights that brought some negative attention the UFC's way. After receiving a number of suspensions for his fights with civilians, the Hawaiian fighter just couldn't get his shit together. In the twilight years of his career, Penn was involved in yet another street fight. In 2019, footage flooded the internet of the 40-year-old beating the life out of a pedestrian. Shortly after the horrifying videos leaked, Dana White said, "He won't fight again, that's it. That's a wrap." Later that year, Penn's estranged girlfriend filed a sexual assault grievance, accusing the former UFC fighter of years of physical and emotional abuse. As you can tell, Dana White's decision to ban BJ Penn was surely the right call. Finally, we've truly saved the best for last. Brazilian fighter Thiago Silva was involved in an armed standoff with Florida police. And no, we're not talking about the legendary footballer of the same name. Silva earned some serious respect, starting off his career with a perfect 10-0 record. His career quickly spiraled thanks to a number of personal issues and run-ins with the law. Silva showed up to his jiu-jitsu center in Oakland Park, Florida, armed with a gun and looking for trouble. The enraged fighter threatened his estranged wife and her current boyfriend, violating a protection order that she had placed. The incident took place in a public setting and during broad daylight, but that didn't stop Silva from causing mayhem. Silva brandished his gun and essentially held the gym hostage. The standoff lasted for over 4 long hours but was cut short when a SWAT team showed up. Silva's messy personal issues and dramatic standoff with the police forced Dana White to void his contract. Following Silva's arrest, White let fans know that the UFC would not stand for Silva's violent behavior. White commented on the horrific event, saying, "This guy will never fight in the UFC again." So, from Thiago Silva's standoff with a SWAT team to Paul Daly's intentional push on a referee, these are the fighters that are banned from UFC events.